And I see photographs. I think there were about 3 photographs of tabletops. And some of the photos was very clear. They were all documents. They were testimonials with his name in there from the USAF, from the Department of Defense, all raving of it. The guy, he hadn't told me anything about himself. He says, okay, you see all that? He says, take a good look. I said, yeah. That's pretty impressive stuff. He said, okay. Seen it? Yeah, delete it.
Welcome to Redacted Conversations. I'm Clayton Morris. On this show, we invite journalists, we invite thought leaders, whistleblowers on to join us for in-depth conversations for stories that the mainstream media largely won't touch with a 10-foot pole. And I think today's video probably is maybe they need a 50-foot pole for a story that they won't touch on this one. One story the mainstream media is starting to touch on is the UFO UAP phenomenon by the United States. Specifically, the U.S. Congress is now holding hearings on these. We're hearing that the Pentagon, of course, is putting together a program specifically to investigate this. Around stories of stunned military pilots. Of course, we've seen these stories get buried and suppressed for years. The Pentagon and Congress have lied to you for many, many years about these stories, what they know about UFOs, what they know about wreckage materials, what they know about abductions, all of it. And they've been reverse engineering these materials for many, many years, as we've highlighted here on this show before. You've probably heard all of the stories, the Roswell story, the UFO crash, where we have downed wreckage that was being used and recovered by the U.S. military. You may have heard of the bombshell story in the New York Times a few years ago about the USS Nimitz, of course, which may in fact have led to these congressional investigations. All of those stories you may have heard. But what we're going to talk about today is arguably one of the most suppressed UFO stories of all time, the story of Billy Meier and the unbelievable authenticated experiences. We're going to show you some videos, show you some photographs today that will probably blow your mind. So buckle your seatbelt. My guest today is Michael Horn. He is one of the leading authorities on UFOs in the world. He's been a guest on Coast to Coast over 22 times. Michael has been a researcher for over 43 years on the UFO phenomenon, and he joins us now. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Clayton. I appreciate being here. And as you said about suppressed stories, smile to my face that we have the opportunity to speak.
Well, that's our goal here, is to bring truth. That's our whole purpose of this show, is in search of truth. And I think I always say that run away from people who are inflexible. You know, that's one of the things I say on the show all the time, that look for people who, when presented with facts, when presented with truth and presented with evidence, are able to then, it changed their mind. Run away from the people who, when presented with those things, can't change their minds. So that's one of the things we try to shed light on this channel all of the time. Michael is the English media representative for Billy Meier. You can read his daily posts at his website, theyflyblog.com. We'll have links to that in the description so you can read Michael's updates there. Michael, I want to start with this. You know, as a journalist, I like to look at the main questions that every journalist should ask in a story. I think oftentimes journalists don't do that, but that's what I want to do with this story. You know, answering the questions: who, what, why, where, and how. That's the basics of journalism, right? So I want to try to educate our audience around this topic. And I just want to start with the basic question at the very beginning. We're talking about Billy Meier. So who is Billy Meier?
Billy Meier is a now 85-year-old Swiss man. He claims that since he's been a 5-year-old boy, he has had voluntary face-to-face meetings with human extraterrestrials from an entirely, of course, obviously, other world, and that he had a particular mission that throughout his life, he always had the option and opportunity to decline, as well as to keep going. And each time that kind of crossroads came up for him, he went further. And his life has been the most remarkable thing I've ever learned about. it's kind of, you could say, Luke Skywalker meets Indiana Jones and Lawrence of Arabia. And it pops into my mind because this is a man who has had the most brutal and the most amazing life history, from the early persecution in his life by classmates and teachers and all, because after his alleged earliest experiences meeting an extraterrestrial human being who became his tutor for 11 years, he couldn't speak about this to anyone except a very small group. And strangely enough, that group would include a parish priest, several school teachers, and even the psychologist Carl Jung, who, while he assisted at certain phases of young Meyer's experiences, he maintained an anonymity because his own work in the world would have been discredited by coming forward and saying anything about this. So it's when you ask who is Billy Meyer, I immediately go to so many facts and facets. In the 1950s, he was known as the Phantom in the Middle East. He was called in by police departments in West Pakistan, in Turkey, and in India to bring in serial killers and mass murderers, people who were quite asocial, antisocial, dangerous people. He had developed nerves of steel as young as 16. He'd been in the French Foreign Legion when he ran away from Switzerland. I mean, this is a story that when you take that thread on the sweater and you start to pull it, any and everything imaginable starts to unravel before your eyes, and then you go, well, what can I make of this? Could this possibly be real and true? So one overriding thing that I've said to people, because UFOs are now the trendy topic in the world,
right?
But the fact is, the confirmed existence of and contact with advanced space traveling extraterrestrials would be the single most important story in all of science and human history. It's now trivialized, made trendy for various reasons, and those reasons also connect to why most people in the world do not know about this still ongoing 80-year running UFO contact case.
So this 80-year running contact case he's 85 now, so this started when he was 5 years old. I want to unpack, we're going to show some amazing photos, some amazing videos in a little bit as we go through this story. I've been pouring through the documents, watching your documentaries, really diving deeper into this story. And I had been tangentially, I'm fascinated by this subject for many, many years. I had been tangentially aware of the story, but I think it has been largely suppressed. It is one of those stories that for some reason we do not get to hear about. Videos get taken down. There's all sorts of evidence that this has been held back by governments. Can you talk a little bit about why we don't know more about this story, and who do you think is behind the suppression of this Billy Meyer story?
I didn't even think we would go to this first off, and I'm glad we did, because this is the core of the material. This is suppressed because it threatens every religion, every belief system, every political structure. And it does so because you mentioned something that is rarely mentioned, and it is mentioned throughout the Meyer material over and over: the truth. Scientists don't like that word too much. They talk about facts, which is fine. But science also has its own peculiarities in terms of the way it likes to define things hierarchically, so that those who are supposedly in the know are above others. So I say, when these Plejaren people, when they are speaking with Billy Meyer, and he's transcribing later on the recorded conversations, they speak to us logically. They never have a theory, and they don't speak in terms of beliefs. They speak in terms of what they know and what they don't know, logic, and they speak about truth. And they speak to us truly in the language of science. And I say that because in the conversations, in the prophecies and predictions, either in direct or offhand ways, they bring to Meyer or answer his questions about things that are requiring scientific knowledge, requiring vast and highly evolved knowledge that we, in many cases, certainly do not possess. And that's one of the things that attracted me here. I don't want to go too far afield, but it was the scientific information that I came upon, and I didn't have an upbringing in that, but it took me into many interesting places. So it is also said on the other side, let's say the more right brain side than the left brain, that reincarnation is a fact of life. In our world, we can't prove it. We can't disprove it. It goes farther. They say that each human being, each and every human being in our world, and if you will, throughout the cosmos, because they say that the universe is teeming with life, not locally, but it's out there at various levels of evolution and development. Each human being has an immortal part. This
And
is, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, and I think that to me, it's one of the reasons why these stories get suppressed is because we have this new world order. We have these globalists who, of course, want control. They want to consolidate power. This would upend the apple cart. We saw it. We saw evidence of that, of course, when Orson Welles put on the War of the Worlds radio show, and police stations all over across the United States were alight with phone calls because people thought aliens were invading. So we saw some evidence of the panic that would ensue, the idea that we would have UFOs landing on the White House lawn, and it would upend world religions, and it would throw into chaos this idea that we have to have bad guys in the world, good versus evil, and we have to have the military-industrial complex and keeping us at perpetual war, right? All of that would, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, would dissipate, would vanish as a result of knowing. Heck, even President Ronald Reagan said it at the United Nations, right? He stood in front of the United Nations and said, I imagine what it would be like if an alien force came down. We would, world peace we would have as a result because we would unify. So maybe that's a little esoteric for our audience, but that's kind of how I see it more as like an umbrella thought of why this would be detrimental to the globalists who want to control everything. Am I wrong?
Well, you hit on things that are covered in this material specifically as well. The whole thing of the War of the Worlds, where H.G. Wells had written this thing, and Orson Welles, the great actor, producer, or wonderful voice and all, they were commanded virtually by the CIA. I don't know if it was quite called the CIA at that time. They were told under threat of death to themselves and their families that they would do this. And the reason for it, according to the information in the Meyer case, is that the crashes, the Roswell crash and other crashes, not only in the US, but around the world, where military retrievals would come in and, it never happened kind of a thing. But let's go back. So this whole thing was engendered. Now, this new world order you talk about, according to the Meyer material, and he has it way over me on this one because I'm not a student of history, he talks about our country's history, U.S., that around 1787, things were set in motion that would establish certain, let's say, paths for the United States that would not necessarily at all be known publicly. They might be suspected. The agenda would ultimately be a world control. This country would rule the world and control everything. This country now is one of the few major countries that has never been attacked, literally in a war on our soil. And that there have been, throughout our history here, various entities that would become known even as the shadow government. And there's a lot of material about that. We've published what Meyer has said, and a German author who correlated Meyer's material to things that we can see in the world. Billy Meyer is told back in, I think it's 1948, about a so-called capital might. That's, a capital power that would come into existence in 40 years' time, and it would be a shadow government in the United States. And then in 1988, BlackRock came into existence. These things are not coincidence. So when you talk about it, in 58, Meyer already foretells in the same paragraph where he speaks about a worldwide netting of computers which didn't exist in 1958. He speaks about the agenda for every man, woman, and child on the planet to be biochipped, to have a biometric chip that would control them down to the last meter.
And we've been covering the World Economic Forum talking about microchips. So he had foretold this through his And explain. So I want to get through some of these specific examples, like the microchipping that he had predicted many, many years beforehand. But it's not a prediction. How would you describe what happens when Billy Meyer is at home and suddenly he's contacted? Do they give him a set time when this is going to happen? Who are these creatures that are specifically speaking to him, and how does that interaction unfold for him to then start transcribing this information?
Well, your audience will get a chance to see the illustrations of what, let's say, 5 of these people look like. They're humans like us. They're virtually indistinguishable, with maybe certain little characteristics that are more typical of them and a little less typical of us. They are fully human. They live much longer than we do, as a rule. What Meyer experienced starting in childhood, when he's 5 years old, he hears a man speaking to him in his head in his Swiss German dialect. He's a 5-year-old kid. Now, he's already been kind of like a cosmic kid. He's fascinated by the cosmos. He's drawn to crawling out of his window in the middle of the night and staring into the universe. From that time on, he learned how to consciously, with their assistance, develop the ability to receive and transmit certain types of very clear telepathy. We don't have people on Earth, maybe there's 3 or 4 somewhere in hiding, that can do something remotely similar. He can do this, they can do this. All humans have the potential. We're simply at an evolutionary level. We have certain things that are here. We used to be there, and we're getting here. So telepathy is there, and there's a couple different kinds of it. The means by which they initially will contact him. He'll sometimes just get a cool feeling on his forehead. He'll pay attention, and he'll literally be told, we want to meet you at this place and this time. Decades earlier, when he was younger and all, he would have to get on his moped he's a one-armed man, so he did everything with one hand, and still does, of course. And so he would drive out at any hours of the day and night to wherever they told him to be, and precisely get there at this time. It's very Germanic in that way, very Swiss. This time, you'll be here, you'll be there. They would meet with him outside, generally, in the ships. He's been on board these crafts since he was a child.
So I want to get to that. So he would see these, he would go to these locations, and then he would see these beam ships, these large craft as a child, right? And then, of course, we can show through, I want you to describe these in a few minutes here, to some of the different sightings. We'll get to those in a second. I know that everyone wants to see that, but specifically, he would go and he'd see a craft, maybe in a field or something, and then he would have these interactions.
Yes, pardon me. Let's go to the first one. He's a 5-year-old boy. He and his father had previously, days earlier, seen a large silver disc zoom overhead in Switzerland. He asks his father, what's that? And his dad says, well, I don't know. Maybe it's one of Hitler's secret weapons. We're talking 5 years old. It's 1942. It's towards the end of the Second World War. And he forgets about it. It's a little puzzling. Then he goes out to play one day, and he's growing up in a beautiful pastoral area in rural Switzerland. He goes into the woods, and there's a clearing, and he sees a pear-shaped craft on 3 strut-like legs, and an elderly man in what appears to him to be a deep-sea diver's suit without a helmet. He's a gray, silver-haired man, and he's standing there, and Meyer describes, and he speaks about it, this man radiated a benevolence, a kindness, and he felt no fear. And he came forward. The man beckoned to him, and he came forward, and they entered his craft. And that began an 11-year journey, literally, of education, of travel around our world, off of our world, seeing different planets in our solar system. As a boy, he saw certain things on the moon that he described that were not discovered till decades later. This is where, when I started to get into the astronomical prophetic information, I went, how do you do this? How do you know this? How would this man know this before discovered? But to come back to it, so for instance, throughout the years then, and in India, 1964, there's photographs of these craft, in the sky, witnessed by 100 people at this ashram. He was studying Buddhism at the time. He was to learn everything about the world's religions, the cultures, and all. So he traveled with these people, and he traveled on his own, 42,000 miles or 400,000, whatever, a tremendous amount of travel on Earth, hitchhiking, earning his way. An old Kodak Bellows type camera. I'm familiar with it. My father had one. And he ends up taking these phenomenal photographs. And this would become pivotal when I end up in 2017 being interrogated for 3 months by a former top-level supervisor and investigator for the United States Air Force, OSI, and Department of Defense. A whole other story if you want. But Billy Meyer.
Yeah, hold on. So I didn't know that part. So you were then, in 2017, interrogated by the United States government about these photos specifically, or just your contact with Billy Meyer in general?
To be clear, a man who was the top investigator and supervisor, USAF, OSI, and Department of Defense, who had retired, came upon this material online. He called me on a Saturday morning, 8:30. Hi, my name is Joe. I'm an investigator. You're with this Billy Meyer thing. Will you talk about it? And I said, yes, of course. And he said, are you sure? I said, well, yeah, why? He says, I think it's a hoax. I think it's a roaring hoax. Older, gruff-sounding guy. And I said, well, let's go. Let's talk. Yeah. Because it's the people that are most that ask the questions, that bring out the information, and also help me to learn more about what I know and don't know. So for 3 months, every Saturday morning, 8:30, the phone rings. It's me, Joe. Yes, I know. And within a week's time, it was no longer a conversation. This was being grilled. No two ways. But in that, first conversation, it's like I already knew I was in for something. So for 3 months, the phone rings and we go through this. And sometimes he'll ask me something, I'll answer in silence or, okay. And then was the next thing. Then he disappears. In August of 2017, phone rings. Hi, it's me. Yes, Joe. How you doing? What's up? He says, look, I'm going to tell you who I am, and then I'm going to tell you about your Billy Meyer case. This is a guy who had a kind of New Jersey, New York accent, one of the kind of a tough guy. I'm
from Philadelphia. I know what those guys talk like. I know how they sound. Right. They're no BS. They're no BS. They're going to cut right to the chase. Yeah, I get it.
Hot is the operative word.
Right.
So I say, okay, Joe, who are you? And he said, well, first, I want you to open your email. I said, okay, and go, open the computer. And I see photographs. I think there were about 3 photographs of tabletops. And some of the photos was very clear. They were all documents. They were testimonials with his name in there from the USAF, from the Department of Defense, all raving about the guy. He hadn't told me anything about himself. He says, okay, you see all that? He says, take a good look. I said, yeah. Okay, that's pretty impressive stuff. He said, okay. Seen it? Yeah, delete it. I said, okay. And I wanted to hold on to that stuff, but it was like, no, we get rid of that. He says, get rid of it. And then he says to me, I'm the former top level, right at the very top. He says, look, USAF, OSI, Department of Defense, I personally supervised, interrogated, vetted hundreds of people vying for, already in high office, people who could have their finger on a nuclear trigger. We ferreted out moles. He tells me this whole thing, what he's done hundreds of times. I read body language very well, he said to me. He said, okay, so I went after we were done, 3 months. I spent the past 5 months investigating what you were telling me. I looked up that woman. Now, she's a woman, she's a grown woman. Oh, yeah, Kobo Chang, a woman who had been a child at the ashram of this monk. It was actually her grandfather in India, where Billy Meyer took a bunch of photos. He said,
of the UFOs. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100 eyewitnesses. And he says, look, I checked that woman out. That's true. She's now a retired diplomat to the UN for Cambodia. Solid woman. I checked out her credentials. And then I saw that video interview online where she came forward in about 1998 with another Indian woman, and they describe all this stuff. Credible person, both of them credible. Nothing to gain from coming forward. And I checked out the newspaper in which this article appeared, and I checked out the reporter. All check out good. And I read the story about Billy Meyer, and he's got these dozen, actually they say in there, he's 80 photographs, and you guys still have a dozen of them. And he said, I looked at this, and now I'm going to tell you about your Billy Meyer case. It's 100% ironclad authentic, and I will take on any skeptics on your behalf. He did. He took on one guy in so-called ufology, a guy named Kevin Randall, who's been attacking Billy Meyer case, demolished him. Another guy in India who actually had helped us prove the case was real, and then something flipped in his mind. He got scared. I don't know. Took him on, and then he calls me up, and we became, more conversant in a friendlier way. But a very intense guy. And he said, "Look, no more with these skeptics. They don't understand research. None of these people know what they're talking about. So I'm going to make it easy for everybody. I've written an article. You can put it on your website. I go through the basic steps. Anybody, you do not have to be an investigator. You'll go through the means, the motive, the opportunity, and I will flesh it out. And you will see how if one of Billy Meyer's photographs is real, you've got to take in the whole case is real." And he does. And he says, "Look, we don't only have Billy Meyer's photos. This man has films, all pre-digital stuff. How does he know where to go for these photo ops, for the filming?" And he says, "Look," and he's selling me on it.
Right.
So I said, "Okay." And he says, "Look, it's pretty simple stuff. If anybody goes through it logically, they'll come to the right conclusion." And I'll add one more thing. He said, "After I did all this, I went online and I looked at every video on YouTube and everywhere. Billy Meyer," he says, "I told you I read body language. That's the most honest man I've ever seen. Thanks very much." And we had
meaning Billy Meyer is the most honest man you've ever seen. He's ever
That's
seen.
What he meant.
So I want to go through now some of the evidence. So so this guy reaches out to you. And by the way, what was this? He worked for the U.S. Air Force Office of Investigations.
Office of Special Investigation and the Department of Defense.
And so why was he was retired.
Yeah.
What was his motivation for reaching out to you, do you think? Was he still working for them on these investigations? What?
I'll tell you that there are possibilities, and I only say, you asked me, what do I think? Why? Here's a guy, he's an expat. He's an older guy. He's living out of the country. He's now online. He doesn't seek attention. He doesn't have a website. He's been through a lot of interesting things, to put it mildly. And so he's searching one day, and for whatever reason, he comes upon my Billy Meyer site. I don't think it's a complete accident, because there is a kind of assistance that we get in this world if we grab it.
Right.
There are ideas, there are impulses even deliberately put out that these people have done. They don't do our work for us, but they seed things, and many of those things have shown up in films and stories and what have you. And there are people that come to find this case for whatever. He was not into UFOs. This guy's I'm going to bust this situation if there's anything to bust kind of guy. He says we ferret out moles and we make
he's like a professional debunker, given his history. Yeah.
He's a supervisor of investigations. This is a man tasked, along with the people in his profession, with protecting the security of the country and the hundreds of millions of people here. This is not ufology, folks, and this isn't phony hearings where, what is that thing in the sky? This guy wants to know. This looks phony to me. I'm going into it. And he did.
So let's go through. Yeah, let's go through some of the evidence now, and let's talk about. We'll put these up on the screen. We're going to show a bunch of these different videos here and photos. Let's go through some of the beam ship photos, some of the first ones that you think are the most compelling. And it's interesting because we did a story recently where I think that's how you reached out to me when we first connected, because we were covering the Scottish Highlands Calvine UFO story, where this photo had been lost. It was sent to the local press, then it was lost to the Ministry of Defense in the UK, and it's since resurfaced. Yes. And so we were covering that story, and it was a very clear photo, and we talked about it as being one of the clearest evidenced photos pre-digital of UFOs. And then I get to see in more detail all of the Billy Meyer photos, and frankly, the Billy Meyer photos just blow the Calvine photo out of the water, so to speak. So let's go through some of the early ones here and talk about what we're seeing here on the screen.
Sure. These are some of the earliest of Billy Meyer's photos. We'll show you first the 1964 photos. Now what you see is some look like, there's one that looks like a bunch of lights in the sky. Now that's what people are generally more familiar with when you talk about UFO photos. They're lights in the sky. These days, with video cameras and all, we're seeing clearer objects, but This is, early Meyer stuff. Now we see that there's a very distinct object, a craft that's hovering over an ashram in the vicinity of certain buildings in India. A couple different photos of that. But as we look down, we see there's also a photo with the lights in the sky. If we're careful, we can see there's a woman in this photo,
Right.
sort of in the center, at the bottom of the photo, and that is apparently the nanny for the young Pobol Cheng, who was later to become the diplomat for Cambodia. And okay, then we go down the screen to the last photo, and it's a very strange photo. It's a man sitting on the ground cross-legged with a cowboy hat, with a spire behind his head, and he's sitting facing the camera, and above his head, in the clouds, is a cross. Now, I'm there with that photo that we're looking at. I'm there with my partner, Jack Gerlach, the German guy, German-American guy who's the director and doing the filming here. And we get our noses down onto Billy's album because we're going, wait a minute, did someone paint something on this Billy's? No, it's Asket made this head in the sky. Asket, his second extraterrestrial teacher, is in this craft, and she has generated, according to Billy, this hologram, a hologram in the sky. Now we look closer. No, it's not painted. This is a photo from a 1940s bellows camera, very hard to get a good photo, let alone special effects. And if you look carefully, you see the cloud, but part of the craft is behind the cloud, part of it's in front of it, and here is this cross in the
Giant
sky
cross, yeah.
in India. Now, I will tell you what my own thinking is, because I've never asked Billy why. By the way, the photo is apparently taken, I think this one was taken by an English woman who knew Meyer, and she may or may not have been the person who gave him his nickname Billy because of the way he dressed at the time. He had the cowboy hat, he did carry a weapon a lot because he was doing work for these police departments and what have you, and he looked like a guy out of a cowboy story. Yes.
I want to talk about some of the scientific and sort of verifications of some of these craft specifically. And maybe we can talk about some of the photos which you have admitted, and I think looking at them, any one of us would look at these sort of, what is it called, like the wedding cake UFO, and think, oh, these look like somebody made them, in a 1950s sci-fi movie, and they spray painted with like silver paint, and they stuck ping pong balls on a thing, right? But these have been scientifically verified, right, as accurate, as authentic photos. Number one, can you take us through some of the verification process of these photos that we can look at here and put them up on the screen as well?
Sure. Let's start with the earlier analyses. When they were done on the 1975, 76, 77 photos. And as you can see, we have documents that UFO photo analysis. This was set in motion by a man named Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevens, retired from the USAF. He, even as early as 47 in the Air Force, he'd been tasked with investigating UFOs. And there would be something that I discovered later that's pretty mind-blowing that he did. He puts together a team. He's got a husband and wife team, Lee and Britt Elders. These are top-level private investigators. They work for and with Fortune 500 companies. They secure, anti-espionage work for banks, Fortune 500 companies. As I said, no, they're skeptics, though, about the Meyer case. Jim Delatoso, a guy who did the earliest photo analyses. These are people that history will thank. They endured a tremendous amount of hostility, attacks on credibility and what have you. And then there's Tom Welsh. There's other people who participated in analyzing. It wasn't just photos, I'll just say it. Films, sound recordings that can, to this day, you need banks of computers to duplicate them, and metal samples analyzed by a genius at IBM, Marcel Vogel. He said, I can't make this with any technology. Go back to the photos here. So they are analyzing, and there's a lot of stuff in this analysis about the thermography and this and the haze effect. I'm not a photo expert. It's Greek to me, but I could read it and understand that they were putting these photographs under very specific analysis and using very specific parameters. Well, we saw that also. There's a document from a book called Light Years by Gary Kinder. light years. And Gary Kinder was a skeptic who was given an assignment by his publisher to investigate the Billy Meyer case. So he goes and he goes and visits Meyer, and he's looking at photos. And so what he does is he brings this material to people like David Froning. David Froning was involved with the military development. He was an astrophysicist, McDonnell Douglas, and he and a small group of scientists he was working with were involved with the study of zero-point energy and hyperspace propulsion. He was a guest of mine at a presentation I did in Los Angeles, and he spoke to a crowd of 450 people about why this case was authentic. Okay, move on down the line. We've got different people. There's Robert Post from JPL and all. I'm not right now looking at all the names there, but we've got people like Michael Malin from Mars mission, the camera, was it called the Observer? I'm not sure, but all of these people, including you've got Marcel Vogel down there at the bottom talking about the metal samples and what he sees when he starts examining under greater and greater magnification and using different techniques, not just microscopic enlargement. All of these people give a statement about, and Wally Gentleman was in there. He was the special effects director for 2001. Now remember, these people are being interviewed probably in the 80s, early 90s or something, and they are all experts. And there's a guy from USGS looking at stuff. And so what happens? Nils Ragnerud, who I got to meet later on, he's a sound engineer. There were 4 sound laboratories where they examine these things. Well, all these people give their honest impressions. They're saying, well, this looks good. I don't see any evidence of hoax. It would take this to be able to make this kind of a film, according to Wally Gentleman. We're talking doing not just scale models where you could dangle a UFO around and create the effect, but what would it take to suspend a large object near a farmhouse in a tree to create this particular thing? So I even brought these into the guys who did the Academy Award-winning special effects for Independence Day, and they also said, well, this it's probably not possible to do it without special effects. We're talking about large objects here, not little models. So all of these people sign off and basically give a statement saying, yeah, this passes muster. Well, skeptics tried to attack that as not being legitimate, except the publisher had made it obvious to Gary Kinder that each of these people had to sign it off because he didn't want to get sued by them later on. Like Gary Kinder said, you said this. No, I didn't. Michael Malin, I'm Mars. No. So you've got this level of expertise, which is subsequent to the earlier analyses. Then we get into 2015 or so, 2015, 16, whatever it is, where Francisco Velate, a guy was living in South America at the time. I think he's in Canada now. He's a computer specialist and photographic, and a guy in Japan, also professor there, Chris Locke. They start to analyze 2 things, the so-called pendulum UFO that's dancing around a tree and this WC UFO. He publishes a 74-page analysis. Not only do they publish the analysis, Chris and Francisco, they give you all of the contemporary online digital tools that they used to analyze, and it becomes very interesting. The detail when they start zooming in on reflections, and then you can see the detail work here. And then there's this video.
Well, that was amazing to me. So I think what you're talking about is on the wedding cake UFO specifically, when from 1980, right? This photo is from 1980, right? 80 or 81. They're zooming in on this. And if this were a hoax, you actually see within the spheres, each of the spheres, you see the reflection of the distance using scientific tools to measure how far back those trees were that are shown in the reflection, almost impossible to basically recreate, right?
Yes, in what we're speaking about specifically, it's a reflection of what's called the carriage house, which I've been to this place 20 times since. It's a little building on the property opposite the main house that Meyer lives in, and in between is where this craft set down. So when they zoom in this case, on the globes, on these very interesting, Christmas ornament-like globes, you see that reflection of that carriage house behind it. And they, using triangulation and other things, they were able to give very specific distances, that measurements that agreed with the distance, not only between the main home and the carriage house, but the size of the craft that Billy said. Then there it would be, this would be so many feet behind it, that the reflections would be stuff that is way above my pay grade in terms. I'm not a computer specialist. And when we put this video online where Billy Meyer steps into the frame, and this wedding cake craft is in the distance, hovering motionlessly, that bothers everybody. It's motionless right next to a tree, which is about 40 feet tall. It's not a tiny tree. And Billy steps into frame, and with the one hand, while his video camera is rolling, he takes some pictures, and then he zooms in. It looks like about 600 feet possibly across this huge field. And then you see this craft, and you see it's a real tree. And then we put up a photograph that one of the photos he took, and then we zoom in. We show the craft sitting on the property there, and we zoom in on some of the details. By the way, there's new discoveries going on about these crystal things, and this just keeps unraveling the information that's in the photos. So you get to see, my gosh, what kind of machining is this? What are all these different colored crystals around it? And when skeptics try to recreate it, they put thumbtacks in because they can't do it. It's just far too complex. In 2020, I heard from Billy, and he said, can you go to Moab, Utah? There's a storage unit there, and there's some archives from Wendell Stevens. Remember I said Wendell was the lead investigator?
Right.
He says, we'd like to see if there's anything of value in those. Wendell was just a wonderful man who knew so much. He just was a wealth of found. So go out there, dusty little storage unit, not exactly little, 24 boxes that are Wendell's archives, what's remains of them. They've been scattered around, and box by box, open them up, pull out the stuff. I've seen all this before. This is nothing new. Literally, it's a Sunday, late afternoon. It's the 24th box. Open the box. What's that? Pull them up. And that's why, especially with that Calvine thing, it really hit me to get to this. Oh, there's a bunch of photos here. Oh, I thought they were photos of that in a series that Meyer took, where a Swiss Mirage jet in Switzerland had passed behind one of the UFOs. It was the cover of the first photo book that blew my mind. And I just saw it, and I didn't think too much more. Oh, they'll want this in Switzerland. I send it over, and I'm even saying, I think it might be the Mirage jet. And they write me back saying, no, it's not the Mirage. That's a stealth fighter. That's Askett's craft. Billy's not even in that craft. And then the information comes forward. Taken by Wendell Stevens in 1981 at Groom Lake, hidden. He had hidden himself there. I think he had help from the ET. 9 photos of a top secret stealth craft. Then when Melissa Osaki, who is a webmaster, starts digging into these photos, it's not a black plane. It's a camouflaged stealth plane. There was only one flight of the camouflaged stealth plane. So we've got these articles on the website showing from her research, digging in deeper, we know who the guy was that flew that plane. And he, of course, didn't want to talk about any of this, but that's fine. It's, past it. There is no threat from these people. This was a demonstration of the most advanced technology. That craft can travel in space and time. Here's our stealth plane that is sent over because this thing shows up on radar. Wendell Stevens is hiding at Area 51, Groom Lake, whatever is down there. And 9 photographs show the passing of the stealth, and the craft does nothing. These were analyzed by a guy who was formerly with Kodak, an expert. And not only did I ask him, this is a real photograph here going on? Oh yeah, we've got says that plane, there's more motion showing in the photograph. That has got this thing is standing still. They're both in the same thing. I said to him, that's great, but I want to know about the back of the photo. Huh? Okay, yeah. I said, tell me what's on the back of the photo. Well, this was processed in the 1980s. I said, that's exactly right, isn't it? Processed in the 1980s, a top secret flight. Our government, this has been sent to that committee, the HICCCS, House Intelligence Counterterrorism, whatever it's called, committee, being chaired by Representative Andrew Carson from Indiana, there's a woman named Amy Munch, National Security Advisor, emailed me. I'd left a message. I never expected to get back. She calls me up, very nice woman. She invites me to send everything. She forwards it to the committee. No one in America or in the world will ever know the committee has it unless they manage to hear it here or somewhere. They will never see any report on it because the agenda of the committee is to develop weapons of war, not to talk about the truth, the real truth of the UFO things. The tic-tac.
So this is amazing. I mean, we talk about the tic-tac, but here we have Wendell Stevens out photographing a UFO. He's there. He's photographing a UFO. He's not there to photograph the stealth fighter. He's there photographing the UFO, and then the stealth fighter shows up because they're aware of this UFO. Somehow the government becomes aware of it, and they send a stealth fighter.
The ETs knew there would be the test flights, that this was about to be debuted. Wendell is a former Air Force guy. Wendell supposedly first meets Billy in 1978 or so, except he first meets Billy in 1968 or 69. We have a photo, we'll put it up, with Billy and Wendell together. It's not taken in Switzerland, it was taken in Arizona. And Billy didn't get here on Air Swiss. They picked him up and they brought him. There were things here in Arizona specifically that they had to see and talk about. There were things in America that this is why you will not hear about this, because these people have been trying to, in a way that is non-inflictive, that doesn't force us to believe anything, that gives skeptics an out. All of the attacks by skeptics on the UFO evidence, now some of the loudest skeptics, they will not even respond to an email or a tweet. They ban me because they can't address it. We've defeated them all. But the UFO community, all of this UFO stuff now is sucking up the bandwidth, and everybody who was flipping burgers a year and a half ago is now a UAP investigator. No background, no research, nothing. Wendell Stevens is brought there with their help, because they knew the stealth was there, and they knew if they appeared at that place, Wendell would be able to photograph it, and that decades later, the good people of Earth might start putting things together. We are not under threat for people.
So just for a timeline here, and we'll wrap things up in a second, but just as a timeline thing. So Wendell Stevens goes here in 1981, because this is an amazing story. Wendell Stevens goes here in 1981. He's called there by the extraterrestrials because they knew these stealth fighter test programs were going to be taking place. So he's there, and Wendell Stevens, former Air Force pilot, is there photographing a UFO when the stealth test pilots are now running their routes. When would we learn?
I was
going to say, when would we even learn about the stealth program? So, and we verify with Kodak that these photos are taken in 1981. When did we even learn about the stealth program?
I'd have to look it up, but I think it was probably not too long after that. But this is definitely before any evidence was released to the public. I think for the most part, even though, as I say, we found the camouflage photos that were, I think his name was Hal Farley, may have been the original test pilot for this. And he's got, we've got these things online. You can see this stuff and you're going to go, my gosh. So it was only because Melissa dug into and said, wait a minute, that's not completely black, that plane, I wonder. And then we find out it's that plane. This is the earliest stuff. This was before they announced it. Wow. I don't yet know the actual years, but Wendell would have been shot without question had they seen him there. He would have been
for sure.
Dead.
For sure. I mean, we've certainly heard the stories about people trying to pop up at Area 51, and certainly it's not a pleasant moment for you to show up in those situations. So I would encourage all of our audience. I mean, we could talk for hours. Michael, and I'm sure we'll do another episode here probably this year or the next few months, and we'll go in through specific. What I'd love to do is for people that have specific questions, leave us a comment on this video. But I would encourage you before you leave a comment to do your own research and go and look at the materials and look at the verification process of the materials and look at the scientific research that's been done around the materials before you just fire off a comment. Okay. What we try to do on this show is seek the truth. And so there's so much to this topic. We can dive deeper at a future date, Michael, into some of the prophecies. We can dive deeper into some of the film. We can talk more about just the globalist agenda. There's so much here to unpack. I just want to let you leave it with us. What do you think is next for Billy Meier? What is his great hope that his messages that he's getting that he's able to share with the world? What is the great hope? Peace, maybe, that we all stop fighting each other?
Well, you've stumbled on it, and in our world of adrenalized activity and excitement and all this stuff that we are so addicted to. Years ago, I'd come to Switzerland full of enthusiasm. I'm going to take on the world and all this stuff. And I'd say to Bill, what do you want? He says, ask people to become reasonable. This is about peace, love, freedom, and harmony. Each human being is of equal value. We must stop fighting so hard for this materialism. This teaching is an offering that is ancient. It's not that Billy Meier's he writes things, but this is ancient, and these are the operating principles for life in the universe, cause and effect and all. So this is it. Peace, love, freedom, and harmony. There's a worldwide peace meditation that's been done since 1988 to try to, just 20 minutes, a few times a month. People can do it if they want. There's nothing that's compulsory, but we have free will, as Billy has said. The core of this whole thing is 100% self-responsibility, not outside authorities telling us how we must live. And each human being is the smith. We forge our own destiny, knowing that and fighting for that if we must, fighting in a good way. Striving, that's a big one for them. Strive for things, strive. So we could go on. And at some point, maybe we get to the thing about, the plot that exists in Ukraine to assassinate Zelensky, the foretold things about the attacks on Finland and Sweden that are, to go back to 1987 and all. There's so much here because they don't want it to happen. The volcanoes will be going off, and the earthquakes and the different things. Some we can tell you very specifically. They've become active since it was first forewarned in the 40s. This will happen between 2015 and 2017 in central Italy. I go and I look. These occurred between 2015 and 20. That was the strongest earthquakes of the time. So all I'm saying is when we talk about things, taking on the skeptics about the information about Jupiter, NASA, JPL announces it on March 12, 1979, the most important discovery of the Voyager mission. Io is the most volcanically active body in the solar system. Billy Meier, October 19th, 1978, is describing it. Wendell Stevens brings that material with him to America days before they announce it as NASA. I've brought this. They go, is the guy a lucky guesser? How does he? No, they're just trying to get us to think, because if we recognize it's something that's copyrighted on a certain date, if it turns out that it's true, and we corroborate it decades later, then we have to ask, how did he know about Mars, Saturn, Jupiter, Pluto, black holes? How did he know then before we had any technology to determine that? It's a gift to us, but we have to think, not get excited about lights in the sky. Best evidence of UFOs. Thank you for inviting it.
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. And I would love to have you back on. We can dive deeper into these prophecies and talk about a whole range of other subjects. And I'm I mean, I could talk for hours about this, so I really appreciate you bringing this to us. I would encourage all of our audience to go and check out the great materials at your website. It's theyflyblog.com. We'll have links in the description below. Seek the truth, even if you're a skeptic. If you're one of the most hardened skeptics out there, okay, take a deep breath and just go look through the materials and start to look at the scientific research done around each of these things. And I think, and you know, we have U.S. astronauts who have confirmed these as well.
Yeah.
Tell me about that real quick before, because I want to. Yeah, sure. I got to go, but I want to hear about that. Okay. I want to hear about the astronaut part of this.
I don't know if it was back in the 90s or something. The late astronaut Gordon Cooper is in Russia, and they're interviewing him in Russian. It's translated, and he answers in English about things, and then it comes up to UFOs, and he makes a statement. I haven't memorized the statement. It's like, oh, yeah, Switzerland, Billy Meyer, yeah, his photographs, those are real. That's the best thing. I don't know why people are calling it a hoax. Those are real. Gordon, they train astronauts. He's a photographer. He's an astronaut. They are briefed and all sorts. This guy just puts it right out there. Billy Meyer, yeah, that's real. I've got another NASA aerospace engineer, Matthew Wiskowitz. You know, he worked on all this space station, all this stuff, you know. Oh, yeah, it's real stuff. He says, I was a skeptic. I was reading CIA stuff, debunking Meyer 35 years ago. Then I looked into it myself. That's real. You know, so the people that can think clearly and aren't biased in any way about that, they know. And I just will tell you, I answer all my email. That's the good news and the bad news. So if people, please put the comments. But if you send me an email with a challenge or a question, I will get to it and I will do my best to answer it, because this is the gift of the world. All the stuff you can get today, it's all free, just for us, the people of Earth, that we may have peace, love, freedom, and harmony.
Well, we'll put it in the description if anyone wants to challenge you on any of these items. You can share information with you and try to challenge some of the most hardened skeptics out there. My guest has been Michael Horn. You can read all of his work over at theyflyblog.com about the Billy Meyer contacts and so much more. Michael, it's been my great pleasure having you here on the show. Thank you so much for joining us and illuminating us. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you, Clayton.
And thanks to all of you for subscribing and really making a time spending. We know you could spend it other places, but the fact that you chose to sat with us, you know, and to spend this hour or so and to learn, to open up your mind, your consciousness, we really thank you. Thank you so much for subscribing, and we'll see you next time, everyone.